I could listen a couple of minutes to the previous speaker, Ambassador's opinion. I could identify something she said. She said it is a complicated answer to a complicated question. And if disinformation is yes, on one hand, it's a very simple thing. On the other hand, it starts to be a very complicated problem, which needs on very different levels answers to deal on the long run with the growing disinformation that is spread among all platforms you can imagine. I also heard that you are talking about social media. And that is where most of the disinformation today occurs. The reason is quite simple. The reason is laid down in a very positive effect of digitalization. The fact that internet is accessible for nearly everyone, mostly in free environments, obviously. But in turn, everything pops up in internet as a potentially valuable information, and that is exactly what's not the fact. And unfortunately, more and more actors are using these effects for their own goals, be them politically or be them economically. So in other words, disinformation has become not a side effect of a variety of voices that can be aired without any control by anyone on internet, but it starts to be misused as a strategic tool for manipulation and interference, particularly on democratic societies. And that is the real threat we are facing. At Deutsche Welle, with 32 languages speaking, and with a man as an international broadcaster to provide reliable information, particularly in unfree environments, we are facing disinformation challenges all day long in all our newsrooms. And as a media, we have grown our fact-checking capacities, for instance, massively over the last years, because this proper dismantling of disinformation needs a lot of investment, and investment in capacities, but also in staff, and sometimes also in time, because it is today not easy to track down disinformation. And a false information maybe is easy to track down via journalistic research or investigation, and that has been the job of a journalist since. So there is nothing new, and it is true also that disinformation exists since long. But what we see in the last years is that the effects of disinformation and the capacity of disinformation and manipulation obviously have grown massively. When you want to tackle the problem of disinformation, you have to distinguish between misinformation, which is maybe a false information, but aired unintendedly. You can be misinformed without the intention to harm somebody. Disinformation is a more intended information, so you know that your information is wrong. Despite this fact, you air this information and to disinform, to turn away or to manipulate people. And the last status of disinformation is the intended manipulation and interference. When you look at victims of disinformation, quite often you see that the disinformation and the targets of disinformation or manipulation usually are government or institutions, official institutions, or it is the wider public. So you should be aware that the target of disinformation is often very broad. And it's not about to say that individuals get disinformed, but societies get, or groups of societies get misled in a certain direction. And you can apply this mechanism or whatever narrative. I was very struck by the narratives you identified on your Slido. All of them are relevant. All of them are aired. What you can see from this Romanian context, obviously, that it's always about polarizing things. It's always about them. In that context, maybe them in Brussels or them in the EU and us in Romania, us in Bucharest. So with disinformation, quite often there is an aspect of polarization, of saying this is them, this is us, and that makes things very complicated, and it is splitting societies. From the most disinformation campaigns, you can see that this split, this turning to polarized or extremer positions is the main target of disinformation campaigns. Last point, because I think I run out of time. One thing that is often forgotten, and the EU, for instance, which is anti-disinformation units in the External Action Service, are very good in that and gives very good advice and consultancy, and I've published a lot of interesting material about disinformation. Journalists also often intend to look at the content. So what has been said? What is the message? What is the narrative? But the real threat on disinformation is the capacity of this information to be spread among relevant groups. So how many people are reading this information? In what context are they reading this information? And how long this information or this disinformation stays public and seeds?